I think the Beatles sold out with Please Please Me. Released 22nd of March 1963. Let's go. Let's try and get this point across. Here we go. Right. If you're not aware of the Beatles, then I don't know why you're even listening to music at all or listening to my voice and just existing, really. So I would jump in the nearest river, regenerate, come back up, like Sonic. You know when Sonic gets in the river and all the bubbles, then he pops his clogs, then come back up, start your life again, right? Scratch everything, go listen to the Beatles. Easy. 20 million plays on Spotify. Less than half of Maroon 5, right? Figure that one out. So yes, they obviously in their 8 years have created some of the best music of the 21st century. No, 20th century. Best music of all time. They're my favorite band of all time. They even invented heavy metal, Mez, with Helter Skelter, apparently. Debatable, but worthwhile in the conversation. They were copied by their contemporaries through and through. Each evolution they went through, they got copied and copied and copied. But if you look at their time in Hamburg, you get a totally different version of the world's most famous band when listening to Please Please Me. When you listen to Please Please Me, it makes them sound sanitized and commercially viable to a wider audience. Now, is that selling out merit? Making yourself commercially viable to a wider audience. What do you think?
Well, they haven't dropped their morals and values, although looking at some of the things they did, I don't know about their morals and values and stuff. But anyway, no, I mean, it's hard to say. It's hard to say. It's like I said, I think it's like success. You define it yourself. I wouldn't say they sold out, which is why I'm very much looking forward to what you've got to say, because
Nice.
I want to know how you're going to equate Please Please Me to selling out. I really want to hear it. And I mean, I've got a gist of where you're going to come from, but this is going to be interesting. So
I can't wait.
I'm just getting myself comfy.
The transition they went through outdated the punk scene of the late 80s and early 90s by a good 3 decades, with a fair few similarities. And that's what I really want to focus on in terms of the connection there that makes much more sense. So let's have a look. Again, there's no surprise that all of the Beatles, so Paul McCartney, John Lennon, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr, they all love rock and roll. They were young kids during the 50s when rock and roll was at its peak, and any movie they could go see, if it was rock and roll, they would love it. So The Girl Can't Help It, Rock Around the Clock, they were there. Even the Elvis films of the 50s. So, they were obsessed. John Lennon was in line to see an Elvis film and he was like, second he seen them on the screen, he was like, that's a cool job. So they loved rock and roll. They grew up on rock and roll and all these songs. Obviously, John Lennon forming his own band, they all picked up instruments. And then Paul McCartney seeing him at a Village Fete and he's doing Bebop Balula. Paul McCartney gets in by doing a rock and roll song. George Harrison gets in by playing a rock and roll song on the top of a double-decker bus. They all get in, right? So, rock and roll is the Beatles at this point. That's all I'm going to say. Their first recording ever was a Buddy Holly tune called That'll Be the Day, rock and roll. And they had an original as well, In Spite of All the Danger. It's quite cool. Based off of blues, of course. So we're going to skip forward now. So the Beatles in their first iteration. John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, Stuart Sutcliffe is on bass guitar. That's what their art musician friend or their art painter friend they just bullied into getting a bass. And Tommy Moore on drums. Never heard of the guy, but he was there originally. They passed an audition to become a backing band for one of the 4 solo singers that were being offered for this. It's like a short tour of Scotland. And instead of getting someone like Billy Fury, that sounded really menacing, they got Johnny Gentle. They're a bit bummed out there. Hello, I'm Johnny Gentle. And it was all rock and roll covers. So they do a short, tour of Scotland. They name themselves Long John and the Silver Beatles. Or they just go Silver Beatles. So they've already got that name in tow. They come back miserable. They come back cold. They come back penniless. They're like, touring life. We're just being scammed left, right, and center here. We're just being used. They all changed their names as well for this. So Paul Ramon, Carl Harrison, Long John, and Stuart Distal. So again, this whole thing of maybe even the ethos the little, not ethos, the little inklings, the birthing of this selling out thing, they're changing their name. Ringo Starr did it. His original name is Richard Starkey. Rock stars do this, they change their name, or even pop stars do it, they change their name to be more commercially viable. But I feel like this is nitpicking here. They're just doing it because they were like, it'll be funny to do. Those bloody Beatles. Well, Colin Paul, that's what you do, innit? That is the quote I've put. That's what you do, innit? So yes, they come back broke from Scotland. They're like, screw this. But it was happening to a lot of local bands in Liverpool. They go do these auditions. They go quit their jobs, go to London, be promised all this work, wouldn't play a single note. So they managed to get a residency in Hamburg. So what happened was this other local band were like, we're going to go down and beat up this guy, this agent promoter who gave us no money. They go down there, managed to get him a gig. And then their name came up. They got put forward for this audition for Hamburg. So they auditioned for Hamburg. Now they go off to Germany. I believe Pete Best is in the band now. So Pete Best is the drummer before Ringo. Hamburg's really where they kind of cut their mustard and cut their teeth in terms of being the band that we know now. Tight, knew such a big repertoire of songs, and them at their punk-like best, their raw, ferocious, energetic best. It's very weird to listen to them at the Star Club, which I'll link down below, and think this is the same band that did Tomorrow Never Knows and She Loves You and Can't Buy Me Love and all these things. Pretty weird. So let's have a look. So yes, Hamburg, there were strippers, women of the night, drugs, booze, nightclubs that played rock and roll to the wee hours. Like, it's a haven for rock stars and kids in bands through and through. Accommodation, awful. It'd be like 2 sofas, maybe even a bed, and you'd have like a Union Jack flag to keep you warm. Really, really bad kind of settings and stuff. Oh, Mez has got a book.
It's all right. This is my Elton John autobiography. And as you're talking about this, I'd like to inject a little quote.
Go on then.
In his youth, he was in a band called Bluesology. And in March 1966, Bluesology went to Hamburg, carrying our instruments on the ferry, then on a train to play at the Top 10 Club on Reeperbahn, because it was one of the places the Beatles had played before they were famous. They were living in the club's attic when they made their first single with Tony Sheridan. The setup hadn't changed in the intervening 5 years. The accommodation for bands was still in the attic. There were still brothels with prostitutes sitting in the windows just down the street. And at the club, you were still expected to play 5 hours a night, alternating with another band, an hour on, an hour off, while the clientele drifted in and out. It was easy to imagine the Beatles living the same life, not least because it looked suspiciously like the bedsheets in the attic hadn't been changed since John and Paul slept in them.
Oh.
So there's your little quote.
And I believe that. I
do as well.
Beatles working, 6-7 hours a night, surviving these mammoth sets by taking Preludin, which is essentially speed, which is given to one of the waiters. Ringo had his own residency with the Hurricanes, but he'd come over and ask, he'd come over drunkenly to where the Beatles were playing and be like, play this B-side, play this bluesy number, plays that. And they would. They're really, really good at picking up songs and doing that. They got deported because George Harrison was too young. He was 17 at the time. And they had no work visas. So in an act of protest, and this gets extrapolated a lot, there's different theories about exactly how many times they did it, but they nailed a condom to a wall and lit it on fire. Bearing in mind the walls were all stone, so there's nothing about catching fire. But because they were going to be working at a competitor's club instead of where they were then, the owner was not happy. So they all went back home. I would say what a very punk thing to do, Mez, wouldn't you think?
Absolutely.
A very punk thing to do. And again, this predates punk by either 10 years or 20 years, depending on if you think the Stooges started punk or if you think the Ramones or Sex Pistols invented punk. Up to you. So yes, they were loud on stage. They swore. They wore leather jackets. John Lennon would come out sometimes with just his underpants and a toilet seat around his head. They just didn't care. They just went on. They played sweaty rock and roll. It was great. It was fast paced. and really energetic. It's really, really cool to listen to, and you really get pumped up, definitely. Which I would say with Please Please Me, you don't really get that kind of raw attitude to them, do you? It's very smooth.
No.
Wouldn't you agree, Mez? So this is where I'm going to start to interject this kind of selling out mentality. How did the Beatles from Hamburg change into the sweet pop darlings of Please Please Me? I will continue on. So anyway, John Lennon says, this is one of two quotes, "Our best work was never recorded," and he's referring to the Hamburg days. That's John Lennon, who has undoubtedly written some of the best music of all time, saying the gigs that he played as a teenager are better than Imagine, Strawberry Fields Forever, I Am the Walrus. That's him saying it, all right? How can he hate the Beatles? He was one.
So that's exactly. In fact, if you just said that quote and gone, Mez, who said this? I'd be like, Lennon. Because he was a controversial individual, wasn't he?
He was.
You know, he in everything he did, in the people he was with, in the music he produced, lyrics he wrote, he was controversial. You
know, the Beatles could play a lot of different songs. They had to. You know, when someone would come in hungover about 3 in the afternoon, they're not going to jump up and suddenly play these loud rock and roll songs. So they learnt standards. They learnt A Taste of Honey, which is like from a musical, which is on Please Please Me. They learnt these Motowny songs from girl groups to practice their harmonies because it kept good business. It meant people sat down, they ordered another beer, and then when it got busy, if they were good, they get sent to create a beer. If they're really good, they get sent to create a champagne, you know. Good business strategies. So yeah, we've connected it in. And like any job or career, you want to be good at it. You want to build up and be successful from it. So if I'm stood around, I'm looking at this new house that I've just bought. Let's say I've done that because I managed to get a mortgage from all this function work that I do. Let's say this year or 2022, or even 2023 goes ridiculous. And everyone wants to book us for like almost every single day or something insane. But I'm looking around this new house I've built. I'd feel so proud and happy. I'd be like, I played my instrument for this. And I don't think anyone's going to go sellout. Absolute sellout. I wouldn't care because I haven't strayed from my morals.
Exactly. That's exactly the point, isn't it? If someone does go, oh, you sellout, what are you going to do? Go, oh, no. When someone says, oh, they've sold out, do you, like this conversation right now, do you think Adam Levine is sat in his massive house going, oh, some ginger bloke in Bristol said I've sold out? No,
I think he has that for a split second, but then he realizes that the mojito that he's drinking is so nice.
Yeah.
He's just like, I'm chilling.
And he looks
more ice for the ice bucket, please.
He looks at his 4 platinum records for songs about Jane and goes, who cares? Adam Levine certainly doesn't. So why should I?
He can still play guitar very well.
Exactly. And his albums coexist with me. It's not a problem.
There you go. But yes. Okay. So we're talking about these 80s, 90s hardcore bands and the scene they're in. So when bands from that scene got big within them, and then they took the plunge and signed to a major label, whether a resulting album was their best work, which you could argue Dookie by Green Day was, or their weakest, so Mine Is Yours by the Cold War Kids, fans went as far as to turn around and not face the band on stage when they play a song from their major label. It's like literally turning around being like, we do not want to hear this. You have wronged us.
Insane.
Here's a quote from a Beatle fan club member called Kathy on the Beatles, hitting it big. The Cavern owner, Bob Wooler, got up on stage with a telegram. He looked terrible. We thought something disastrous had happened. Please Please Me has reached #1 in the national charts. The lads themselves just stopped and looked at him because the Beatles were on stage. They thought he was joking. He must have been. Lots of people who didn't know the Beatles started cheering and clapping. 3 rows of girls at the front all started crying. It was a terrible night. We knew then they'll get famous and go away. They won't belong to us no more. That mentality of the Beatles are ours, they're homegrown, we don't want them to go away, they sign to a major label and put out this record, they're going to go away. I think then they only played the Cavern one more time, and apparently John Lennon didn't really want to play it. So there's definitely an element there that the Beatles either were part of that before this kind of hardcore scene really made it into what I'd say a trope of that late 80s, early 90s hardcore scene was that you don't sell out.
That's quite interesting. Yeah, I didn't even know that was a thing, really.
Yeah. So to me, that is enough basis. There's starting to be more of a thread here, more of a basis foundation of like the Beatles sold out. They took this plunge. People metaphorically turned their backs and went, yeah, we're not happy with this. So yes, they were. The Beatles did, like a lot of things, seem to kind of invent this kind of environment. So they're sick of playing long sets for not much money, backing up other artists on records they don't really care about. Brian Epstein comes in, works at NEMS record shop, says, I want to manage you, I'm going to get you better gigs, all these things, but on these conditions. So he goes to them: stop eating on stage, stop swearing on stage, have matching haircuts, all wear smart suits. The first two had nothing to do with how their music was perceived, whether in Hamburg or Liverpool, because if they were playing good in Hamburg, like I said, they get sent up beer and alcohol. It was part of the course as well for audience and band members to swear at each other. They used to do it quite a lot. Nothing about it was shocking, really. The matching haircuts and now famous Beatles mop top was originated from Hamburg, anyway, from their friend Astrid Kutcher, who I want to say Ashton Kutcher. It sounds too much like Ashton Kutcher, but Ashton Kutcher did not invent the Beatle mop top. Klaus Vormann was her then boyfriend. He went on to play bass in John Lennon and George Harrison's solo projects. The last change was the one that split opinion. Now, Lennon famously hated wearing the suits. And a little protest, because he loves a bit of a protest. He used to loosen up his tie, yeah, undo the front button. That'll show him, yeah. There you go, Epstein, have that. But he still wore the suit and he still went along with it and still signed everything and did whatever. But he's like, how's that tie? Wonky enough for you? So, little rebel. Little bleeding rebel. But Epstein knew that, having control of their image and making them appear as likable and professional as possible would establish their career in music. They get their foot in the door. When Ringo joined, he went from a full-bearded teddy boy with a duck's ass haircut, mind, to a clean-shaven, suit-wearing mop topper. So he completely changed it up. He was like, that's what you do. That is what you do. As long as the music stayed the same, did it really matter that they wore a different item of clothing? It just meant they could get more work. What did we do when we were like, we want to make more work? Okay, let's dress a bit more contemporary. Instead of just what we would wear chilling around the house, let's maybe put on a nice button up. And it definitely adds to the success. It definitely adds to the work we get. Lennon, he was quoted as saying, I'd wear a balloon if that's what it took to be rich and famous. He had a baby on the way. He had to marry Cynthia, because back in those days, having a baby out of wedlock was considered very not the traditional thing to do. So you got married. So he's obviously going to think, I need to make money here. And being a new dad and trying to be in a band was almost impossible. Even making money from being in a band was almost impossible. But this upcoming quote helps put this blasphemous idea into place. And I haven't even talked about the songs yet. This is from John Lennon. The Granada people came down to film us. This is when they're in the cabin. And there we were in suits, and it just wasn't us. Watching that film, I knew that was where we started to sell out. So John Lennon has said about his own band, I seen us in the suits, we're selling out. Merritt, thoughts on that, please?
I mean, yeah, he's defined it himself. That's how he feels about it. Again, it is John Lennon, so of course he's going to say that. Of course he's going to feel like that. It's stands to reason, doesn't it?
He hated it. George Harrison hated the suits as well, but you just put them on and whatever. So would it be any coincidence that when they stopped touring in about 1966 and they started doing Sgt. Pepper, suddenly no more suits? They were kind of wearing what they wanted. They didn't have to smooch any promoters. They didn't have to keep up this image to all the fans. Admittedly, their suits got a little bit, I'd say, more contemporary, but they were still wearing a uniform. Their image was dated by the time you got to Please Please Me, that leather look. It just wouldn't have worked. So they had to change their image. I agree with that. Maybe Suits was the best thing to do, but doesn't mean the songs have to change. So let's go into the songs here, because I haven't really spoken about the songs. And this is another main point. Please Please Me seems to lack that raw power and wildness they cultivated in Hamburg, relying on songs from musicals and Motown songs to push forward the image of four young and charming lads who always sung with the female fans in their minds and hearts. The Beatles of Hamburg were a much more alpha male type of group, focused on getting people up and dancing, creating a whirlwind of chaos and fury that rock and roll always strived towards with Rebellion. There's nothing there that couldn't be continued into commercial success and popularity. The parallel universe, the Beatles keeping their leather jacket image, belting out Little Richard songs with full gusto, keeping their rebellious image is essentially what the Rolling Stones ended up doing in the late 60s, early 70s. Do you agree with that?
Yep.
Maybe not verbatim that, but the Rolling Stones definitely went to that kind of like greasy funk rock kind of bluesy kind of rock they're known for now, and that was their later period. Great. I think it's great. So it proves that you don't have to necessarily change or sell out to be able to still have success. It's more of a fact of maybe we should do this as a calculated decision to allow us success. Let's look at the slower, or if we look at the more slower, more pop orientated songs from Please Please Me, that's 11 out of the 14 songs. Misery, Anna, Chains, Ask Me Why, Please Please Me, Love Me Do, P.S. I Love You, Baby It's You, Do You Want to Know a Secret, A Taste of Honey, There's a Place. They are all pop songs. They do not have a rock and roll urgency. They did play these songs in Hamburg and in the Cavern. And again, this was from when people were coming at half free hungover and you just need songs to fill up. So that's what they would do. And when they play in the Cavern, their afternoon sets, they want to play a couple more songs so they could be on stage longer. Might as well play A Taste of Honey or something like that. The only three that leaves is I Saw Her Standing There, rock and roll. Boys, which is a Motown song anyway, but played very rock and roll. And Twist and Shout, rock and roll. Those three out of the 14 are what I would say only gives you a taste of what the Hamburg Beatles were like. So they've definitely got a huge repertoire and they've gone, right, let's just pick those. Let's just pick those. The album was definitely made to hit the pop market and they weren't a pop band. Another kind of statement I'll put there. Playing it safe. The whole album plays it safe. That's what I think it is. So, I've already explained where they picked up all the repertoire. Come on, Past Marv. You've already done all this, mate. Come on.
So just to make a point, you say how safe it is. It is very safe, I do agree. But it starts with I Saw Her Standing There.
It does.
A rock and roll tune. And it ends on Twist and Shout. A rock and roll tune.
Very true. But could you say that it's misleading? Because people go, right, people who know the Beatles, you know, oh, they're a great rock and roll band. I can't wait for this. You get 1, 2, 3, 4. You get the hit. You get the, I don't think it was a single, but like you get the kind of one of the signature songs straight off of the bat. And then you get all this poppy schmaltzy stuff, which I feel 2000s Weezer fits in that category. They release a really, really good single like Pork and Beans from the Red Album. And then you put on the Red Album, you're there like, what is this song I'm hearing right now? Why is he rapping about tipping over cows? I don't get it.
It must have been like, imagine going in, hearing I Saw Her Standing There and being like, yeah, I'll buy it, that's fine. And then going home and having all the like boisterousness. I think that's a good word. Yeah, boisterousness of I Saw Her Standing There. You know, starting with the count in and the guitar solo and the wow, all the like screams and stuff, and then you got the world is treating me bad. Misery.
You're just like, he pooped on my parade.
It is a little, I never thought about that before actually. How that's
nor did I.
A little bit jarring when you really, really consider it.
This outrageous statement: the Beatles sold out. You know, I'm near. Starting to
okay.
coalesce. I'm getting towards the end. Don't you worry, listeners. I know it's about 6 hours long, but this is how long the Beatles sets were, all right? It definitely is versatile, and it's definitely a very, very good debut. So much so that it was the first album that wasn't like a spoken word or a soundtrack album to stay in the charts for over a year until it got toppled by their second record. So it's very impactful, very impactful. It does lean heavily on their range of the pop music they could perform. Out of their top 5 most played songs live, this is until 1966 or even 1969, 4 of them are based in typical rock and roll structure. So Twist and Shout, Long Tall Sally, Roll Over Beethoven, and Can't Buy Me Love. The other one is She Loves You, which I would say is a strong contender for the Beatles at their early era best.
Yes,
She Loves You. And at one point, one of the heaviest things on out of the time. Weird to think, isn't it? That was the heaviest song.
Very weird to think about, certainly.
And this is where it gets even more interesting. Please, Please was essentially their live set recorded tape. But is this collection of songs the best representation of the Beatles sweating away down in the cavern, Mez?
Yes and no. Because if they were playing these songs at the cavern, then absolutely. But the implication is they weren't just playing these songs. They were playing other tunes. They were playing more rock and roll tunes. But obviously this album, this debut, was made to market to a pop audience. It was marketed to a wide audience. You know, it had to be accessible. So it's almost like you can have some of that silly bloody rock and roll. Yeah, you do.
So it's not a true representation of what the Beatles were like live.
As I said, yes and no, because they used to play these songs. However, the implication is they played a lot more rock and roll than that. So it's 70%, just like, oh, that's a nice song. Oh, isn't that lovely? Oh, listen to the melody. And it's 30%. Get that bloody din off. Oh, I'm going deaf, I am. Oh, you're not leaving the house wearing that. You're bread and dripping for tea, and you'll be happy with it. Peace and love. But yeah, that's what I think. Thank you very much.
That's what you think. Well, I think, no, it's not the best representation. This is the best representation. I like that. This is the best representation of the Beatles as a product and what they could become to their new audience of young teenage girls who idolize them as much, if not more, for their looks and image than the music they made. The image of them in real life created mass hysteria. The image of them on a cinema screen when you had a Hard Day's Night in Help caused mass hysteria, screaming, and urine-soaked sheets. I'm going to say it again. Urine soaked seats. Girls used to wet themselves because they were screaming so much of even just seeing the Beatles. Bearing in mind the image of the Beatles wearing suits, shaving their beards, having mop tops, having their ties done up. At the image, not at the music at all. They wouldn't have had that image if Brian Epstein didn't go change this. If they were still wearing all the leather stuff, not as much. To end all of this, there's a very good quote by John Gustafsson, who was in a 60s kind of beat band, who then was the bass player of, I think, Duran Duran or Spandau Ballet, one of those bands, 80s bands. He said, if you never saw the Beatles at the Cavern, you never saw the Beatles. So it implies that all these people that went and saw the Beatles, bearing in mind, most of, if not all of their gigs, they're the ones in Japan, were screaming, shouting, hardly hearing them at their fame. So it was the image of them, the product that they had created and been a part of, that Lennon hated originally, didn't want to do it, said that they'd sold out. They sold out for fame and money and success, albeit they made some of the greatest music. So it's a good example of selling out, but they changed their sound. You look at all of their rock and roll songs that they played. Some of them did seep through onto the second, third, fourth albums. Even on Help, they were bringing back songs from their Hamburg days onto songs there. One After 909, which is on Let It Be, which came out in 1970, is a really old 62 era Lennon and McCartney song. Good old rocker. Even then, that's a Back to the Roots album, which is a different episode entirely. But you can make the connection that they sold out, went pop, leaned really heavily on their pop image. It bit them in their touring run. But when they stopped touring, they suddenly stopped wearing the suits. They suddenly started making music they wanted to make. In regards to, they didn't have to worry about playing it live. So they didn't have to think about their audience. Another aspect of the kind of selling out issue. And if people are going, if you weren't at the Cavern, you never seen them live. And when you've got Paul McCartney, well, when you got John Lennon saying like, our best stuff wasn't recorded, we were the best when we were at the Cavern, and we were the best at Hamburg. That's shown a raw side to us. That's the person that was in there, in that Beatlemania saying it. So this is why I think you can really make the claim that Please Please Me is a sellout album. They sold out because they wanted to be rich and famous. They sold out because they knew that would work. Does that make sense? They knew that would work.
Yep, absolutely. And you've charmed me.
Have I kind of not convinced you, but has the point that I was trying to make, does it actually make sense and you can kind of see my side of it?
You've made a compelling enough argument for me to agree. Yes.
I love that.